Hi, geography students. Last chapter that we're going to go through together for a review before we take our final test. It's actually a couple chapters combined. It's Unit 7 on Southwest Asia. So the first part of it, and this will all be pretty much what you're familiar with. It'll be some multiple choice questions, some matching questions, some map questions, and then a couple of short essays. So some of the first information that you need to know is just the basic general landscape and geography, like the Arabian and Anatolian peninsulas. There was plate movement, and when I say plate movement, I'm talking like the tectonic plates, deep under the earth, that have shifted the peninsulas away and created a distinctive geography of that region. So the Arabian Peninsula is that part that kind of juts out into, on the other side of the Red Sea, juts out into the Indian Ocean. And the Anatolian Peninsula is pretty much what we refer to today as Turkey. The Suez Canal, this is a really important economic canal that was dug. It was a man-made canal, and it joined the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea for ease of trading. Now, even in another area, I talked about how important the Suez Canal is as a strategic area because it was always tightly wanted to be fought over and tightly controlled, because whoever had access to that had easy access to, from the Mediterranean to really other parts of Asia, especially India, and into really into other parts of Asia as well. So the Suez Canal, very important. The Straits of Bosporus, if you hear it just known as the Bosporus, and the Dardanelles, both of these are important straits. Bosporus is an important waterway in Turkey. The Dardanelles are also an important waterway in Turkey. And if you look at your map that you did, where the Bosporus and the Dardanelles are, it kind of links the Black Sea, which is a fairly impressive area, the Black Sea, to really the rest of, to get into the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea. The Jordan River, this is historically a really important river. Obviously, we know this is where John the Baptist started baptizing. This is where Jesus was baptized. That separates Israel and Jordan. Now, what we know is that the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea. And if you remember looking at those pictures and talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls and this area that is the lowest spot on Earth. And part of the issue that happens there is because it has such a high saline content. It's a really unique kind of area, geographic area, but also a very important historical area as well. The Red Sea is what separates the Arabian Peninsula from Africa. The Mediterranean, that important trade route between really Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Tigris and the Euphrates, you see I kind of lumped these two together. Both these areas, today we know the area of Iraq. It's in southern Iraq where these two rivers come together. And we refer to it as the cradle of civilization, or the birthplace of civilization. This Fertile Crescent area that was really one of the most well-supported areas for agriculture, and it allowed civilizations to begin there. When civilizations have access to water, that means their populations can increase, and we saw this area from really thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years ago in this area of Iraq. The Taurus Mountains are in southern Turkey. The Zagros are in western Iran. I still have the Hindu Kush on there. Take that one off. I took off the Hindu Kush. We never actually got into the areas of Afghanistan, so you do not need to know the Hindu Kush. The importance of oil. I think you probably have understood, for how much I've talked about it, how important oil is to this region of the Middle East. It is the most economically valuable resource. There is a worldwide demand for oil. However, with this great demand and this really important precedent that's on it, we also have issues, obviously. There's always going to be a good and a bad. So one of the things that you have to deal with when you talk about oil is transporting it. It's rather risky. It can result in collisions and leaks and spills, which impact prices and the environment. We even see problems with transporting oil here today. I know that we talked in class about DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline. One of the students had mentioned that there was a train derailment, and if oil had been on that, how it causes environmental problems as well. And this is, again, where the Suez Canal comes in, this area that connects the Mediterranean with the Indian Ocean. Well, if you can get oil pipelines or even tankers into the canal, then you can easily transport, or more easily transport oil, really to all parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa, much easier. Crude oil is another fancy, or another basic word, I should say, for petroleum that's not been processed. Crude oil is just what comes out of the ground. If you know what the word crude means, it means it hasn't been touched yet. It's not been processed. And oil is very much of a strategic commodity. Sometimes we know it as black gold, and that nations are willing to fight over oil. That one video that we looked at, it's both a diplomatic tool and a weapon for war. And some people can use it to their economic advantage, and some people use it to their political advantage. But there's also an environmental impact. We have to fracture the earth in order to get oil in many of the places. We have to drill to find oil, and that can have a big environmental impact. And we know that oil's going to run out. We're going to run out of fossil fuels, so we have to come up with another solution to power our cars and cool our homes and heat our furnaces. So as much as we rely on oil, we also realize it has good and bad effects of it. And water is also very important. It's probably the most important and significant resource, where oil is the most economically valuable. If they don't have water, this area of Southwest Asia is really, really going to decline, and they put a lot of money, actually a lot of oil money, into finding new and better technology and ways to get oil, or to get water, to process water to be used. Wadis are these dry river beds that flood in rainy seasons. Wadis are always something that are looked for, but in certain areas they're just almost non-existent. There's a desalinization process. This is the removal of salt to try to use ocean water. Very expensive process. And places like rivers and waterways, these are vital to all of the areas for agriculture, for their water sources, for transportation. But Southwest Asia is surrounded by water. However, they don't really have a lot of rivers and waterways the way other nations do. And so then they have to rely on other types of technology, come up with different ways to irrigate. So irrigation processes, sometimes they might make man-made irrigation. They use fossil aquifers and anything that can help relieve some of the economic impact on importing goods, because we know they can export a lot of oil, but then they have to import almost as many other goods as they do exporting oil. And I said know all the locations of the nations and the capitals. Also know those landforms, like the mountains, the rivers, the straits. I have a good chunk. I think I have probably about 15 questions on countries, capitals, and the locations of some of those major rivers, straits, and mountains. All right, so second page then, human geography. Now this is, as I had mentioned, the human geography is maybe almost as important as the physical geography of Southwest Asia, simply because of how the countries have developed and the reason why they've developed that way. And so it really kind of all stems back to the three monotheistic religions, and the one that is probably the most populated in this area is Islam. And it starts with Muhammad, who is the founder and prophet of Islam. The Kaaba is an important place for all Muslims. It is a mosque in Mecca. It's built for Muslims to worship at their most sacred spot of, like, really of the whole earth for Muslims in the religion of Islam. Muslims follow 5 pillars, or kind of like 5 tenets of their religion. The duties of all Muslims that unite the members all over not only the region, but really the world. They are to make an act of faith and worship Allah, one God and only one God, known as Allah. They are to pray 5 times a day, facing Mecca. They are to practice fasting, especially during the month of Ramadan, their most sacred time. They're to give charity. We understand that as giving to those who are less fortunate, those in need. And they are to make a pilgrimage. It's known as the Hajj, H-A-J-J, to make a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once. A hijrah, if you see it spelled H-I-J-R-A-H, this is Muhammad's escape to Medina. So when Muhammad began prophesying that he was God's prophet and he had the message, there were a lot of people, namely Jews, I guess you would say. There were some probably pagans as well, but who didn't like what he had to say. And he had to leave Mecca in order to basically not get killed or beaten up over what he was saying. So he made this flight, it's called, to Medina to avoid persecution, and that's known as the Hijrah. When he came back to Mecca, that's when we see, the founding of Islam. A theocracy is a government controlled by religious leaders. It's probably best to have a separation of church and state, a nation not ruled by religious leaders. However, that's not necessarily the case in many Southwest Asia countries. Think about the Vatican City. That's a nation all of its own that's ruled by the Pope. That is a theocracy. Some Muslim sects. There are 2 major divisions of Islam. There are many others, but these are the 2 major divisions, and they're mostly divided up between Sunni and Shiite. Sunnis are the majority of the population. In fact, even in the United States, I think they make up like 90% of the population of Muslims. They are definitely more liberal. They're likely to live beyond Southwest Asia. And Sunnis don't necessarily think that governments should be like a theocracy. They shouldn't be theocratic. They should be more democratic, which gives you a good idea and understanding of why they might be more liberal as well. Shias are the people. Shiites are the sect, if you will. They're a much smaller population. They're much more conservative. They often live in and around Iraq, where it has the strongest population of Shia. And they believe that the caliph must come from Muhammad. And the caliph is the autocratic, the theocratic ruler, that religious leader who has come from Muhammad's line of succession. A hijab is a head covering that Muslim women wear to humble themselves in public and before God. And depending on how it looks, kind of almost gives us a good indication of the type of Islam that Muslims tend to follow. So here we go with Jerusalem. This is, there's so much animosity and violence and hatred that has gone on in Jerusalem because it is a holy city to the largest monotheistic religions in the world. I mean, collectively, more people belong to these 3 religions than really probably any other religion at all. And so Jerusalem, they claim as their sacred city. The Western Wall is very sacred to Jews. This is where the remains of the temple are. The Dome of the Rock, this is very holy to Muslims. This is where Muhammad made his journey to heaven. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, this is very holy to Christians because this is the site of Jesus' crucifixion. So each religious group claims Jerusalem kind of as their own. And unfortunately, those areas tend to overlap. And so it results in often violent disputes, political finaglings, if you will. A big part of the issue has to do with Palestine and Israel. Now, Jerusalem today is the capital of Israel. However, long before Israel ever became a nation, it was a place called Palestine. And even if you read in the Bible, you'll read about Palestine, which was the territory of Israel, in Israel, of Muslim populations. Today, it's controlled mostly by Jews. So where is it? Pretty much is in the Gaza Strip, and the Gaza Strip is a very violent area. I hope you do look back at that map. I need you to know that map of Israel, that violent area that kind of juts up right against, or borders up right against the Mediterranean, under Israeli control, and the West Bank. Now, the West Bank is the much larger area of Palestine that's closer to the western side of the Jordan River. And remember, we talked about how important the Jordan River is. It's very heavily populated with Muslims, but there's some Israeli occupation. In the last few months, maybe more about like a year, there's been a lot of talk about annexation of these areas of Israel. And that would not actually be legal, but a lot of Israelis are saying, no, we're just going to take this area for our own. And Palestinians are saying, you don't have a right to do that. And so it's continuing to cause a lot of conflict. Palestinians are Arabs. Palestinians are typically Muslim Arabs who live in Israel, and they often fall under Jewish control. The PLO is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. This is a political and military group that was formed to take back the areas for Palestine. So Palestine had originally been Arab Muslim held territories, and then they lost control pretty much after the Ottomans were beaten, and they formed a group to take back control. And they wanted to take back that control from Israel. Now, Israel, if you think, back in the Bible, this is the original land of Canaan. This is the promised land where Jews lived for centuries. This is where God placed his chosen people. So where it's at, it's in the former land that used to be called Palestine, given to the Jews. It was established in 1948. It came after the Holocaust and World War II because there were Jewish survivors. Those who went back to live in Israel were survivors of the Holocaust and the war, and they were given this land and their independence because they kind of deserved it. You can definitely see why Israel and Jewish people would have wanted some place to call their own, because areas like Poland or Germany or like the Czech Republic, these are all areas that they didn't have a home there anymore. And Zionism is this kind of movement. It was like this very progressive, very calculated movement to settle Jews in the nation of Israel. So between Palestine and Israel, I think you get a good idea of the conflict that happens between these two groups, the Israelis and the Palestinians. And so finally, the Taliban. The Taliban is a political group, especially in the eastern parts of Southwest Asia, like we see it in Iraq, for sure in Afghanistan, parts of Iran even. and they impose strict rules, and they are oftentimes supporters of very radical terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda. We had kind of talked about that before. So there's lots of political turmoil, religious turmoil, cultural and ethnic battles that happen here because of how it's developed over time. So I said, know the map of Israel, be prepared to know the nations and capitals of all those other areas, as well as the landforms too. So I can't wait to see you. It'll be our final test. If you have any questions in the meantime, let me know.